I'm excited to talk about reading.
I am too.
Love reading.
It has been one of my, I feel very like little sistery to be on this journey with you because I'm like, Maggie's doing it. That means I have to do it. However, it's been really beneficial to my practice.
Yes, well, and the whole time I spent a bunch of money to get trained in how to teach reading, which
It's good for you because you have a private practice. I don't need that shit.
I also
I don't need that stuff. Not an After Dark episode.
I don't regret it. I'm still really glad that I did the whole training and everything. There's just definitely cheaper ways to do it, especially for an SLP. Like I think that it sounds like the reading SLP course is probably really good.
I had my eye on it for a very, very long time. I'm going to do the intro really fast before we start talking about
this.
Go
for it.
Welcome to Tell Me About It, a podcast by SLPs for everybody. My name is Francie.
And my name is Maggie.
And today we're talking about literacy, which is a passion project of Maggie and by extension me.
Yes, I love literacy. I love talking about reading. It is very important to me and very close to my heart.
And I came along on this journey because I support my friend. And then I was like, oh, this is really helpful. So what I was saying before our little intro is the fact that I had my eye on the reading SLP's curriculum and kind of lessons and things like that. Just because I was like, I don't really want to spend all of the money that Maggie has had to spend on OG for Orton Gillingham stuff, but I'm still really fascinated in it. And Maggie gave me a huge vote of confidence, which she said, you know everything that you need to know about teaching literacy already. You just need a roadmap to get there. And boy, howdy, was she right. So anyway, shout out to the reading SLP. My Christmas present to myself as an SLP was downloading your curriculum when it was on sale, and I love it.
Yes. So the reading SLP, because we're kind of plugging her, this is Elizabeth Doherty, I think is her name. It's Doherty. I think Elizabeth Doherty. She is a speech language pathologist and Doctor of Ed student in New York City. So she has had her own cash pay private practice for a couple of years now, and she is big into literacy and reading. And so she kind of rebranded. I've been following her for a little while. She rebranded maybe about a year ago to the reading SLP, which love that for her. But she did the same training that I did, and actually is one of the inspirations for me to get Orton Gillingham trained, because I saw what she was doing and I was like, well, I also think that reading is really important and I want to incorporate it into my practice. I was searching different ways to get trained. I saw that she did Orton Gillingham, so I looked a little bit more into the Orton Gillingham approach, the Orton Gillingham Academy, and I went ahead and also did the associate level training, which I did that last year, so in 2024, and it was great. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I have had a hard time completing my practicum to be officially certified, but that's just because I'm trying to start a private practice. I had too much on my plate. You have to do a whole project and paper that goes with it and get observed for a number of hours and stuff. I just couldn't prioritize it last year. It's still something that I want to do, but it's going to take me a while to complete. So even though I've been using the Orton Gillingham approach, it's not something that is it's not like I'm practicing medicine without a license, I'm teaching reading and I'm using a particular approach, but yeah, I don't have the certification to put the letters behind my signature yet. So, but yeah, loved it. It was very expensive. It cost, I think it was over $3,000 to do the training. It was a week-long in-person training in a city that I did not live in, but luckily had a friend in that I could stay with. And then an additional several Saturdays virtually. So it was 80 hours almost of training, didactic training in person. And then you do 100-hour practicum and a paper. So yeah, pretty beefy. But as I was telling Francie, I was like, and one of the big things I learned from it is I already had this knowledge. I just needed someone to help me put the pieces together. So it sounds like the Reading SLPs course is really good for that.
It was, I opened up the document that I received from purchasing her curriculum, and it was the roadmap to reading, and looking at it, I was like, oh, I do know this.
Yeah, so what are some of the well, wait, first do you want to talk
Yeah.
about why we are even talking about reading as
Absolutely.
SLPs?
Reading, I feel like reading in the field has been a really hotly contested thing lately, and probably historically speaking. I can only speak for the last 4 years because I've only been an SLP for 4 years. However, I feel like a lot of people are like, that's not our scope, that's not our scope, that's not our scope, because we already do so much. Like SLPs are truly the jack of all trades when it comes to language and communication. And I would posit it is in our scope of practice, and that is a lukewarm take in my opinion, because reading, writing, speaking, and listening are all the orthographic and verbal components of communication. Like reading and writing are so intertwined with speaking and listening that it is in our scope. And so many, coming from a pediatric perspective, so many of our kids with communication difficulties will also have difficulties with literacy. And so it's absolutely within our scope of practice to treat. And I find that I am a more effective clinician now knowing what I can do to support a kid's literacy. And I've actually been able to get kids off my caseload faster and get them treated faster because they're not having as big educational impacts because I'm also treating reading and writing. So that's my big testament to this, is that I had a student. This is a total tangent, not a tangent. This is related. I'm going to give you an anecdote now. Anyways, I had a student who had a history of having complex, like just so many phonological processes, which for those of you who do not know what a phonological process is, it is basically, if you think about your brain like a filing system, the sounds that we would use to speak are basically in the wrong files, or there's a pattern of errors that you're making where several sounds are lumped into one file and it's the wrong file. Our job as SLPs is to organize those files to be appropriate for the sounds that we use for the language that we speak. So I had a student who had several different patterns of errors and had several different sounds wrong, one of which being medial syllable deletion. They were weak syllable deletion. And I'd seen this kid for multiple years, 3 years at this point, right? Got him as a kindergartner, was now a second grader, and I was like, great, he's almost ready to be dismissed. All of his speech sound errors have been remediated at conversation level. And his teacher comes to me right after district testing and says, hey, this kid doesn't write middle syllables of words, or like doesn't like is missing syllables in their writing. And I said, what are you talking about? But we fixed it. We did not fix it, Francie. That was the most humbling experience for me as a provider, to realize, oh, I had fixed it in speech. His brain did not have those files correct for writing or for reading. So we did really a heavy dose of phonics instruction, and we worked on writing and syllables, and it fixed it within a month. By the time that he did his next round of district testing, he was on grade level. And I was like, oh, this is the key. That was my big aha moment where I was like, dang it, Maggie's right. I need to be doing literacy.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and the aha moment for me was working with kids with severe disabilities or that are severely impacted by their disability, and realizing how big a role literacy plays in independence.
And
safety.
Safety.
Yes. So that was kind of the impetus for me to go into reading as like a niche. And then once I got into it, I was like, oh yeah, this is where I want to be. Because it is this I think that we as like a society, and we as like educators and people that work with kids, have this really funky opinion of reading where we think that it's like some crazy alien skill that like, I don't know. I think that a lot of people just don't understand how it works. And so
don't disagree with that. However,
yeah.
I think sometimes from like an anthropological perspective, how humans have only been reading for a short blip of our existence, and that freaks me out. I just have like very like existential moments like where this is such a new skill for humans as a species, which is crazy to think about. So I do agree with you that like people have this kind of crazy mindset. Sometimes I'm included in that population.
No, totally. That's another thing that like I try to impress upon people, is that reading is not natural. We invented it, we made it up. We didn't evolve to read like we evolved language. So, and I could go down a
That
bajillion
gives me
rabbit holes.
chills. Do you know
I
that?
know.
That gives me chills.
Just from that concept, I could go down so many rabbit holes because I'm obsessed with this topic. But yeah, so that a couple of things just off the bat. Kids have to be taught how to read. People have to be taught how to read. They're not just going to pick it up. Every now and then you'll find somebody who just kind of picked it up because their brain's really good at recognizing patterns. They were just read to a lot, they were exposed to a lot of writing, and they figured it out. Great, good for you. That's not common. The common experience is that you have to sit down and be explicitly taught how to read. Direct teaching is a big part of literacy instruction. And then, we could continue on and talk about the whole language model of reading versus the science of reading approach or other kind of more evidence-based approaches. We will probably get into that later on. But something else I wanted to say off of the reading is not an evolved natural skill. So then what is dyslexia? Because if reading is not a innate skill and ability that people have, then how come some people have a reading specific language deficit? And that's because dyslexia is a language-based disorder. So while most people or not most, but a lot of people with dyslexia don't have overt language concerns, like spoken language concerns, it comes through in their writing and in their reading. And if we want to get specific about it, it's because from functional MRI studies, we know that the visual part of our brain, because obviously reading is also a visual task, but the visual part of our brain that kind of interprets pictures and would memorize a symbol is being switched with the language part of our brain. So when we are reading, we're processing that in the language part of our brain. People with dyslexia are processing it in the visual part, in the picture processing part of their brain. And so it really is those symbols, the symbolic representation of a sound isn't mapping on to the linguistic meaning of that symbol. And that's where the disconnect happens. And that's what makes dyslexia so tough to remediate, because you really have to rewire their brain. But what's cool is also from functional MRI studies, we know that when dyslexia has been successfully remediated, those areas of the brain switch to how we want to see them and how they switch to the way that makes reading easy. So it's really cool. Dyslexia is very fascinating, but SLPs have a role in reading, because if you struggle with language, you will struggle with reading. Just period. The degree to which will vary, but yeah, if you have a problem with verbal communication, either speech or language, you're gonna have a problem with reading as well.
I just had a moment, and we can cut this. I just had a moment where I connected the whole speech is not a fine motor task with writing, because that's not inherently a fine motor task. It's also
Yeah.
a language task. Anyways, that's different. I just had a little neuron connection there.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is that you can't separate language from reading. They are inherently they're melded together. You can't take the two apart. So I think that a lot of times we get into trouble in the schools because people try to silo reading and language, and you can't do that. They are always holding hands. They are always connected. And yeah, you just can't separate them. So SLPs absolutely have a role in reading, and fight me in the comments if you think I'm wrong, because
well, and it was coming from somebody who didn't get formally trained. I was really nervous about it, because I was like, this is such a big topic. And I would look at the reading curriculum my district was using and I don't understand this. I know these words inherently, but I don't understand. I don't see the common thread between what I'm doing and how I can apply this. And it wasn't until somebody made it clear to me that I was like, oh no, this is exactly what I'm doing anyways. And it's just a matter of I do a lot of phonological awareness tasks anyways with my kids who have phonological disorders, because that's how we're going to remediate those things. And it's just a matter of starting to incorporate writing with that. And just, okay, well, you're already doing these things auditorily. Let me do this visually too. And
Mm-hmm.
it was actually easier to incorporate than I realized. And yes, it's rote, but so much of what we do already, specifically with articulation, is pretty drill and kill. That's just how it's going to happen. And so it was so easy to just incorporate written language with what we're already working on for, and I'm talking for speech specifically. We'll get into language later, but there's such a connection there with speech and literacy too. That's been kind of what was my gateway drug for this. I also think I use this analogy a lot when I'm talking to other professionals about SLPs' roles in the schools. I feel like a brain mechanic a lot of times. I am up in their brains rewiring and doing tasks to help rewire the pathways to make learning and language more efficient. And so oftentimes what I'm doing is those little tasks or the heavy repetition to help build those pathways in order to rewire their brain for more efficient learning. And that's crazy. That's another thing where I'm like, this job is so cool and so spooky and like
Yeah.
so otherworldly sometimes because we are up in those kids' brains helping to rewire. So
Yes. Yeah. And it is crazy how automatic reading and language becomes. So when I say like they're melded together, and something, I'll reference this here, but I'll also include, and actually let me pull up a little picture of it just for my own sanity. But oh, my browser, my default search engine changed to Yahoo.
That's
This is a
terrible.
Yahoo hate account. I don't know why, because I'm using Google Chrome
Oh
too.
dear, that's haunting.
Anyway, okay, so I will also include an image of this in the description, so you can look at it too if you're listening. But there's a visual called Scarborough's reading rope, which you might be familiar with too, Francie.
Yeah, we
This
talked
is,
about it in grad school. That was the other thing. I
yeah,
know these things. I just couldn't connect them. We've talked about Scarborough's rope in grad school.
yeah. So this is a really famous metaphor, I suppose, for how reading works. And it kind of uses the image of a rope. So there's like two kind of big components that are made up of smaller components, and they all twist and braid together to create skilled reading. So if you think of it as a rope, one big chunk of it is language comprehension. So you have to have language comprehension to be able to read. Language comprehension is comprised of background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, so syntax, semantics, grammar, broadly speaking, verbal reasoning, so the ability to understand things like metaphors, similes, making inferences, and literacy knowledge. This is like a print concepts genre type of deal. And that is pretty specific to reading. But when I think of it in spoken language, I think of that literacy knowledge is kind of an analog for pragmatic language. So when we're verbally communicating, we have to know enough about the situation we're in to be able to communicate effectively. Same thing with reading. You have to know the kind of book that you're reading to be able to understand it wholly. The second kind of big strand is labeled as word recognition in this rope, in this metaphor. And that's comprised of phonological awareness, which Francie talked about just a second ago, decoding. So that's that taking the code of these little arbitrary symbols that we have decided make certain sounds and being able to decode that cipher into sounds that we understand. And what's the last one? Sight recognition of familiar words. So, and that is, you know, we can get into sight words a little bit. I don't really want to. I don't like talking about sight words because
That one's tricky.
yeah, it's tricky. But it basically is like how every time you read your name, you're not sounding it out. You see your name and you're like, oh, that's my name. That happens with more and more words, the better you get at reading. So when you're a really skilled reader, you're not sitting there sounding out every single word. You're only sounding out words that you've never seen before or words that you're not quite sure what they say, something that's confusing to you. If you're a skilled reader, most of the time you read really quickly. So as these things get braided together and twisted together, they become increasingly strategic and increasingly automatic, which makes reading this fluid, easy, automatic process. And something that I think is interesting about reading is that once you know how to read, you can't not read something. So, like when you see a combination of letters that creates a word, you can't just see the symbols anymore because you know how to read it. Your brain just does it. You can't turn off reading. I don't know. Maybe that's like dumb. I think it's
I
interesting
know,
though.
because you become I think about this, and this was a conversation you and I had when I'm including me on this journey with you, when we first started going down this literacy pathway together,
Yeah.
which was think about driving. Think about how much
Mhm.
language you have around you all the time while driving, and you just have to pick it up. Like, you just have to know. And if you didn't know and you had to take that time to decode as these signs are flying past you, you're gonna miss your exit. So you do want that automaticity to reading, because that's gonna help you
100%.
not miss your exit. So
Yeah. And so this is kind of leading into something I would like you to speak on for a little bit about like how language is so integrated into our world and how
mhm,
language is the medium by
yeah.
which we experience learning and education and all sorts of other things. But I think that something I wanted to say really fast is that as we become increasingly online
Mm,
and so many things continue to be like in audio formats, I have even seen other professionals, I think in the name of neurodiversity and in the name of accommodation, question whether or not reading and literacy, like skilled literacy, matters because we're so online and so many things are available in an audio format or can be easily converted to an audio format. And I would still push back against that because I think that what skilled readers forget, because it's so automatic for us, what skilled readers forget is how much text we are constantly surrounded by. And so
constantly.
when it's easy for you, you don't think about it. But even in a world that is super digital and super audio heavy and like visual heavy, there's still tons of text. And especially kids, but kids with disabilities need to be given the tools to interpret that text so that they can make safe and smart decisions for themselves online, but also in the real world in school and for their later independence and growth. So, yeah, literacy is hugely important. I don't see a world in which it'll ever stop being important. But, Francie, you said something really interesting off mic about language
Yeah.
and
This
education.
this is a sorry, my husband is being so sneaky trying to walk through the living room, and it's really precious. And I love him. Love you. Um, so this is something that's this is apparently just a reading SLP fan account at this point. So
Love her.
one of the things that she put in a prediction for 2026 was talking about SLP's roles in schools moving from more siloed, we've used that word twice now, siloed treatment of kids with disabilities into more generalist populations, because as the science of reading becomes a more prevalent approach to teaching literacy, that inherently comes with the science of language. And one of the things that I think about a lot in the schools, and that got me really processing on this, is language is truly the vehicle for which learning has to happen. All information that's being portrayed in schools is coming through in a linguistic cart, basically, and it's getting shoved through our ears because that's how we communicate, and that is how information gets processed and transferred between people. So it's natural for SLPs to be in schools, and I have a feeling we're going to have much broader reaches as we get into more science of reading, science of language, as we learn about literacy and learning. Our brain is constantly taking information, and that information is one coming in visually, sure, but we can also have the visual language with writing, but it's coming in through our ears. And so we as SLPs are in a really unique position to help support all learners in the vehicle of learning, if that makes sense. So I'm very interested to see how this changes our role in the schools as school-based SLPs, because it's us girls and boys. I don't want to be overgeneralized.
And the occasional boy.
And the occasional boy. Love you guys.
Yeah.
But it's us that will help kind of unlock the key for great learning at a very broad level. So,
yeah. And I think that's something that has been really eye-opening for me. And now, again, like now that I've seen it, I can't really unsee it, is that reading is kind of treated like this mystical, magical process that you and I both also believed it to be before we got training, and we were like, oh, I already know how to do this. Like, I already know how to teach a kid to read.
And I think that's why it was so opaque for me for a long time, because I knew about the language acquisition theories, but that never touched literacy. And so for me, I was like, yeah, it just makes sense. Our brains are primed for language. So they are, in one way or another, ready for all forms of language. And that's simply not true. So it's, as an SLP, really eye-opening to be like, no, this is new for our evolutionary history, not something that is inherent for the majority of people, and that we can do something about it. And that it's relatively easy to treat.
That's the thing, is that like reading it's kind of easy to treat, not in the sense that it takes a long time, and especially for kids with dyslexia or a language disorder or something, it's going to take even longer. It doesn't mean that those people can't learn to read. It just means it's going to take a while. And there, you know, depending on the severity of the disorder, there may always be an element of that like laborious nature. Like it might not ever become easy and automatic, but it can become easier and more automatic. Like they can always make progress, and remediation, especially of dyslexia, is always the goal. But yeah, it's not, reading overall is not that hard to teach. You just have to teach it sequentially. Yeah, you have to know the steps.
And that was the part that I, after looking at the Reading SLP's roadmap to reading, once again, another plug for her, I was like, I'm only treating up to pre-literacy skills. I'm not treating anything past phonological awareness and or letter-sound correspondence. Like that was where I felt my role as an SLP ended in the conversation about literacy. And there's so many other things that we can be doing that can be relevant during language therapy sessions, during speech therapy sessions. And now that I've seen it laid out for me, I'm like, what was I thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to that point, you were only teaching up to pre-literacy skills. And I think a lot of people start teaching past pre-literacy skills. So if you've got, like kindergarten is usually when most kids start to learn to read, or like they encounter direct teaching for the first time. They are ideally supposed to already have pre-literacy skills on board. And those skills that we're talking about are developmental. So phonological awareness,
like
and
rhyming,
phonemic awareness.
And, you know, deleting and blending certain sounds. Like if, and that's one thing that I like about UFly. I'm going to talk about UFly for a second. Both schools that I have worked at have used UFly. And now that I've seen this pathway and I've seen the giant book that UFly gives you, I'm like, oh, these align perfectly. They have sections talking about what you need to do to be able to identify what sounds start with the same letter, what sounds end with the same letter. Do they rhyme? Can we change these words to rhyme? Situations like that. So those are the manipulation of sounds in spoken words is the prerequisite to being able to manipulate written sounds.
Yes.
So
and that is developmental, by the way. Like that, kids do develop that, which I think is why reading works for humans so well, because we have this series of sounds that we can manipulate, that we can then map onto symbols and understand and interpret. So that is developmental. And a lot of kids maybe are missing some of those early building blocks. So then when they hit kindergarten and their teacher is already working on, you know, consonant, vowel, consonant words or short words, reading and spelling their name, that kind of thing, but kids don't understand that words are made up of separate sounds, reading and writing is going to be pretty much impossible, because you have to understand that words are made up of separate sounds before you can write down the separate sounds.
Right. It's so fascinating. I just love it so much.
No, I'm so glad that you were never like, Maggie, you fool, don't spend your time reading.
No,
No, you were
never.
always
I
just
just
like, cool,
I never
okay.
yeah, I just never understood how
Yeah,
important it was and how naturally it falls in stride with what I was already doing. And I think that's the
yeah.
big part that I'm trying to impress upon SLPs who are maybe a little reticent about taking the plunge into supporting literacy. It was so much easier than I thought it was going to be. It
Mm-hmm.
was so much easier, and it doesn't take a lot of time. Like, I take just a few minutes at the beginning or end of my session just to really drill literacy with some of my kids, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Reading is not magic, it's science. And it can be taught uh pretty simply. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be all the bells and whistles. For some kids, it's going to take a long time, and that's okay. You got to keep at it. And because it is so hugely important to independence that,
And
yeah.
one thing that I also think is really important is that a prerequisite to reading is not verbal speech. You can be non-speaking and still pick up literacy skills. And if you're asking me, Francie, what are you talking about? How can you do that? Girlfriend, if they've got a high-tech AAC device, they've got a phonics page on there. Use
Mm-hmm.
it. It has been really helpful for me to be like, let's play with these sounds on your AAC device as we look at these words together. And that's been really helpful. But even then, you don't necessarily need that either if you don't have a student,
Yeah.
or if you have a student who does not have a high-tech device. You can still do it. And
Yeah.
you can do
It
those
is.
receptive tasks. Am I saying this sound or this sound? Point to it.
Yeah.
There are so many other ways to teach literacy for students who are non-speaking, and it's important that you do so. Going back to what Maggie said, this is the key to independence, everything around us. And while, yes, Maggie mentioned earlier that some people are postulating that it's not going to have as big of an important place because of accommodations that are naturally built into society now, contracts are going to be written. Leases are going to be written. Anything that has prescription bottles
Yeah.
are written.
If this is a person that wants to have any job ever, they
Mhm.
need to have a level of literacy.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like collegiate or
Mhm.
like something really complex, but they need to have a functional level of
Yes.
literacy.
Menus at restaurants are
Yeah.
always written.
Yeah.
So we need to, and they are owed the ability to do that. I don't know. I'm of the mindset that reading is like a fundamental right situation and literacy skills is a fundamental right
Yeah.
because you are being denied a huge part of existing in a society if you can't read what's going on around you,
Mhm.
read what's happening around you. So that's my mindset on it, is that we should be teaching this
Yeah.
from a civil rights standpoint.
It yes, thank you. Literacy is a civil rights issue.
Mhm.
100%. And yeah, I mean kids that we were talking about this I think off mic too. We like talking about cognitive impairments and
Mhm.
really what an IQ score is, what it boils down to is how quickly can you learn something. And, there's more to it than that. But like for a lot of times, especially in the school setting, IQ basically equates to how fast you can learn something. So if a kid has a low IQ, a cognitive impairment, it doesn't mean that they can't learn. It doesn't mean they're incapable of learning, especially reading. It
Especially
just
reading.
means that it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot. And yes, there may be an extent to which they can only go so far, right? I'm not saying that every single person is going to be reading, I don't know, the Iliad or whatever. Like it but even kids with pretty profound cognitive impairments can reach a level of functional literacy that will improve their safety and their daily living skills and their life overall. So I think a lot of times people think functional literacy and they think, oh, the alphabet and letter sounds and spelling their name. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. But are you teaching them how to put those letters together? Are you teaching them how to sound out words? Are you teaching them how to recognize like common safety? Like you were talking about prescription bottles or like
Yeah.
cleaning supplies. Are you teaching them to recognize common safety symbols? These are all parts of literacy, that literacy knowledge piece of language comprehension that can make a world of difference for disabled kids who turn into disabled adults
Adults.
that have lives, So it's absolutely a civil rights issue. And I will die on that hill. So again, fight me in the
Really?
comments if you think
Yeah.
SLPs are not supposed to be in this field. And that's not to say that reading specialists don't matter, because they absolutely do. What I want to see in the future is SLPs partnering with reading specialists instead of saying we're on two separate teams.
I agree with that. I think for a long time, it was SLPs take disabled learners, interventionists take struggling learners. And that was a big division. And there's so much I constantly learn from our reading interventionists at both schools that I've worked at. They know so much and they do this every day. And that's really special. And so I think the collaboration that we can have will only ever benefit kids. So,
yeah. Yeah. I have had a lot of fun collaborating with the reading interventionists that I've worked with. But yeah, that, and the schools are a tough setting too, because you said SLPs work with disabled learners and reading interventionists work with struggling learners. But you and I both know that the cutoff for disability in the schools is actually way too low.
Yes. So while a student might be labeled in the state of Missouri, a student might be labeled a struggling learner and actually have a subclinical level of disability according to how we qualify. And you can go watch our IEP and read and testing episodes if you want to know more about that. Mm-hmm. However, they are also working with kids who might not qualify for IEPs, but still really have issues with learning. So,
yeah, because a kid with dyslexia who maybe has pretty mild dyslexia, oftentimes kids with dyslexia have average to above average cognitive ability. So what that means is if you have somebody who's a bright kid that cannot read, you get a really good guesser. So these students have learned that it's easier and faster for them to just guess at what the right word is than it is to sit there and sound out the word and actually read it, because that's the part that's really challenging for them. But they're smart and they have big vocabs, so they can just guess based on what they know about the topic, or based on the picture that's on the page, or based on other things that they already know. They're making inferences and they're just guessing, which for kids can get you really far in school, but it does fall apart at a certain point. And so sometimes we'll see 3rd, 4th, 5th graders that have skated by guessing for years. And finally, the reading, the academic material has become too complex for them to guess anymore. And then we'll realize, oh, they've actually been dyslexic this whole time.
Right.
They were just.
I think and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but that's why I feel that decodable text when learning to read is so much more important than leveled text, or I can't remember what the other. It's the Dick and Jane style books where it's they're I can see a, and then it's an unknown word. But I
think sometimes those will be called decodable texts, which is a total misnomer, because they're actually, what it is a memorization text.
Right.
They're just it's teaching kids to memorize what words look like and make good guesses. The Dick and Jane books from a million years ago.
Yeah. But to be able to look at a child and know that they are decoding or ciphering through what these letter sounds mean is so important, to make sure that we have a good foundation to move on to those more complex words and spelling patterns, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So something that is a huge thorn in my side, and is becoming a thorn in your side too, Francie, because I've dragged you over to the
dark side.
The dark side with me, is a lot of schools in America teach kids how to guess instead of teach kids how to read. So sometimes what you'll get is a student that is struggling to learn how to read with pretty basic phonics instruction. And this is usually your kid with dyslexia, where that task is just a lot harder for their brain. So then they'll get put into a special reading intervention group that is basically teaching them how to use the skills that they're already using to make good guesses, but is encouraging them to do that. So one of the whole language approaches to reading is, does it look right? Does it sound right? Does it make sense? And they're talking about the word in a sentence. So if they were presented with a sentence that's did you have a nice holiday? And they're trying to decode the word holiday. They might be prompted to look at a picture. Oh, there's a Christmas tree and an airplane in the picture. I wonder what they're doing. Does it sound right? Like, look at the first letter. It starts with an H. You have H, so we know that it starts with that sound. Like, it's guessing. It's not actually going sound by sound, letter by letter, and decoding the word. So,
Which, when I think about that too, requires such deep semantic knowledge.
yes. So that's the thing, is that like guessing at every single word, which, okay, by the way, this is a huge tangent, but that's basically what ChatGPT does.
Yeah.
Those language learning models essentially guess at
Yes.
what word goes next in a sentence, and they're really good at word prediction. And so, like, we have machines that can do that kind of okay. They can do it pretty well. But then if we're sitting there and teaching our students to just guess and like Mad Lib style put in words, like they're only going to get that right so often. And as we have seen this with ChatGPT and AI too, they're pretty good at telling you correct answers for things that are like essentially common knowledge. But it's when you get into really specific knowledge or really complicated material, AI starts to crumble and starts to not do as well. Same thing with kids that are guessing instead of reading. They're going to be pretty good for topics that they're really familiar with, things that they have a lot of exposure to, or like very simple materials that they can guess accurately. But once they get up into, especially middle school, high school, where they're starting to have to read in order to learn, that's going to start to fall away. So yeah, it's a really big problem. And I think that this way that we've been teaching reading for the past couple of decades has led directly to the literacy issue that we're seeing in America today, where less than 80% of American adults are literate. And only 1/3 of American fourth graders are reading proficiently, or like on, that would basically be on grade level. So guys, what are we
If that's not
what are we
a
doing?
5-alarm fire, I don't know what is, right?
Yeah. And in a world that is becoming increasingly online and increasingly surrounded by text, that's not a pretty equation, you know? So aside from just disabled kids and being able to provide more independence and more skills to promote independence, typically developing kids also need to learn how to read and also deserve that right too.
And one of the things that is encouraging to me, while yes, we find ourselves in a literacy crisis, something that you told me early in this journey together is that literacy can happen at any age. So just because you are an adult now and might be struggling with reading doesn't mean that you can't get better at reading. You can learn literacy at any age, and that's really special.
It is. So because reading is not developmental, you can learn it at any time. It's a skill that has to be taught. So just like how you don't have to be 6 and in kindergarten to learn how to ride a bike, because that's not, you know, you need some developmental gross motor skills to be able to do that. Like, same thing with reading, you need some developmental skills as prerequisites, but you can learn to read at any time. So even if it's a teenager or a middle schooler that has just been taught to guess, they can still learn to read. Even somebody in their 20s, 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Like, I've heard, you know, anecdotal stories about people that are well into adulthood and never really knew how to read, didn't get good grades in school, didn't go to college, and just kind of skated by until they finally were taught directly how to read. And now they can read. So yeah, it's not magic, it's science.
What are some of the biggest there's a lot of controversy in the literacy field, specifically with approaches, science of reading versus balanced approaches versus whole language. What do you think are some of the biggest criticisms you hear of science of reading?
So there is this lovely little anecdote about the gleefully illiterate 7-year-olds of Scandinavia. So every couple days, I'll see something online about how Scandinavian countries don't teach reading directly until like 3rd or 4th grade, and how the kids are so happy and they have such beautiful, magical childhoods, and the wonder of childhood is like preserved, and kids aren't sit and forced to read and drill and memorize and all of these, like making learning and education seem like a punishment rather than opening a door. So I think that people really latch onto that because it paints this kind of wondrous, whimsical view of childhood that we all want for kids. We want kids to be happy and playful and imaginative. I also want them to be literate, and kids can start learning to read really young. So I think that's one of the big criticisms that I'll see of this like direct science of reading based approach, is that it's too rote and it's too memorization heavy. And look at these whimsical children in Scandinavia. They are gleefully illiterate at age 8 and 9. And okay, that's great. Like we just said, you can learn to read at any age. But what that's going to do for the roughly 15% of the population that has some level of dyslexia is going to make it even that much harder for them to learn how to read. But that would be one of the main criticisms I see. And I want to say this with gentleness. I think that the people that kind of adopt that approach and use it as evidence against the science of reading don't know enough about how reading and language actually develop and are taught to see the flaws in that.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think, what was it? I saw an article recently calling about like the end of vibes-based teaching in America, because for the past
Vibes-based teaching.
You're right.
Yeah.
I think for a long time we've talked about what learning looks like rather than what learning is. And so we knew that we wanted students to have an enjoyment for acquisition of knowledge, but we didn't know the pathways to make it effective and fun. And so that led to this resistance movement kind of through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s of that very much like, oh, let's go do this like writer's workshop and cuddle up with like a really fun idea. We're going to be so cozy, and like, oh, we're going to snuggle up with a good book, and like, but no explicit teaching for how to get to the pathway or get to that end point of effective writing and effective reading were ever really taught, because we were focused on what it looked like and not what it actually was. And so I hear a lot of pushback being like, well, it's boring. And I'm going to say this with love of my heart. It's not sexy, and I know that, but it works. And there's ways that you can make it fun. It does not have to be boring. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate too, that I've learned from you about the OG method, is that it incorporates multisensory input too, which can be so much fun for kids. So much fun for kids. Yeah. You can make it fun. It takes
gamify phonics instruction. You can still like make direct teaching fun. And also I would say, yeah, sometimes things are boring. Okay. It's okay to be bored. Like
it is. It's okay to be boring.
Ideally, school's not boring 100% of the time, right? Ideally, a lot of it's fun.
And also, I want to emphasize too, people are like, you're going to get so caught up in, sorry, my husband just texted me. Oh, am I frozen now? What the heck?
You are frozen.
There we go.
Okay, you're back.
Sorry, Jack just texted me. I have an oil leak in my car.
Oh dear.
Okay. Anyways, that's going to be a later Francie problem. I digress. One of the big criticisms that I see about science of reading too is that it focuses too heavy on phonics and not enough on comprehension. And I postulate to you, how do you think we're going to get to comprehension? Because if we don't know the words in front of us, we are never going to be able to comprehend them. So yes, you need to teach phonics, and yes, it needs to be robust, but you also do need to quickly move into the comprehension side of things and the world knowledge side of things. So I would recommend you using phonics as a pathway to world knowledge, as opposed to world knowledge as a pathway to reading, which is what that kind of whole language approach and that heavy semantic emphasis approach requires, truly. Because if you don't know a lot about the world and you're being taught to read by guessing about the world, you're not going to get there.
Yeah. And it really is a dance. Like it is kind of it has to be world knowledge grows as literacy knowledge grows. Like they have to go together, because if you are really good at decoding, but then like we can decode nonsense words that follow a pattern of English writing. But if that word is meaningless to you, like a nonsense word, then you're still not going to be able to understand what you're reading. So that's when we need that world knowledge and vocabulary, history, background, all of that kind of thing to support our phonics and decoding. It has to be a dance. It has to be both. So yeah. Oh, there was something that you said that made me want to like diving board off of it, but I can't remember what it was. Oh, in my experience, kids love to know stuff. Like they get
There's one
so
thing you need to
excited.
know about children. They are nosy.
They are nosy. They like
nosy
to know things.
and they love being in other people's business. Best way to teach them to be in other people's business? Reading.
They do love to be in other people's business, but they also like to show you that they can do stuff. They like to be independent. When we are teaching, the age that we kind of teach kids to read is also the age that they start to really value their own independence. And so I've seen a lot of students when they develop rhyming, which is a developmental skill, that's like one of those phonological, it can also be taught, and sometimes it has to be, but I'm getting off track. When they figure out how to rhyme, they'll just do it unprompted. They're like, oh, Miss Maggie, watch this. Cat, hat, sat, pat. Like they'll just rhyme, or they'll give you a rhyme for a word that you say because they've figured out what rhyming is and they want to show you that they can do it. So that's another kind of rebuttal that I would have to the gleefully illiterate Scandinavian fourth graders is that like, I don't know if Scandinavian countries are actually doing that or not, or if it's just kind of a myth, whatever. And also just because something works over there does not mean that it's going to work in the USA.
Well,
which
and this goes
is
into
a bajillion times bigger and has a completely different history and culture.
And a different language system. One of the things that you and I have talked about is that to learn to read in different languages is a different process than English. English pulls from a lot of different languages. So we have to know spelling patterns that exist in French. We have to know spelling patterns that exist in Spanish because we pull a lot of words from other languages, wherein other languages, I think European languages specifically, are very unadulterated by other languages. And so it's a little bit
other
easier.
languages are more siloed. They're more like they just kind of keep to themselves. They don't pick up. Like someone, when I can't remember, I think it was our mutual friend, said like English follows other languages down a dark alley and like beats them up and takes their words. Yeah, like that's kind of how we have collected our spelling patterns. It doesn't mean that they're nonsense. It just means there's a lot of rules because it's still rule governed. But yeah, this is like I work with a lot of kids we're working on habilitation. So we're working on basic communication and life skills. But if you are in the market for some enrichment, like if you have a kid with typically developing language and you want to enrich their reading skills, teach them French and Latin. Because we get so much, and not a lot, they don't have to be able to read Latin. They don't have to be able to speak French. But like, if you have the means, the capacity, and the time to get them some French and some Latin on board, it will boost their English language skills like crazy. Because we draw a ton from those two languages, not just in spelling, but also in root words, and root words. So that's my 2 cents on that. You want to enrich your child's language experience. So yeah, you and I could probably keep talking about this all afternoon, but any final thoughts on literacy or a final message you would like to convey?
SLPs listening to this, if you're reticent about including literacy or you are like heels in the ground, don't want to include literacy, I promise you it's not as scary as it seems, and it does not make extra work for you. It will actually make your job easier. That was the biggest takeaway for me. Second of all, reading interventionist, I love you. That's all.
Yes.
We should partner more.
Love you. Yeah, I think my takeaway would be if you have the time, if you're just listening to this and you're not an SLP, if you have the time, really stop and think about how much text we are surrounded by and how often you are using a skill of reading that once it becomes automatic, you kind of forget about it. Because that is definitely eye-opening for me. So yeah,
one
text
last
is
final
everywhere.
thought.
Reading is everywhere. Yeah.
Text is everywhere. Reading is everywhere. If you're interested in how America got to where we are with our literacy crisis, Sold a Story, a podcast, is a really fascinating investigative journalism piece as to how we got here and what political pieces were at play that resulted us with these literacy instruction styles, and also kind of what's happening now and why. It was a really fascinating read for me, or listen for me, and it really opened my eyes to some bigger conversations about literacy that happen at the national level. So very fascinating. If you're interested in learning more, I really recommend that podcast.
I agree. Sold a Story is really good. Another book that I really liked that we've both read is The Knowledge Gap too, which is a book by Natalie Wexler. And it follows a lot of the same trails as Sold a Story, but it has kind of a different spin to it, and talking about how important content knowledge is for reading and for academic success, and how content knowledge is not equitable along socioeconomic lines a lot of the time. And actually, to just do a shameless self-promotion, I want to follow my Substack. I also wrote a little bit about this a couple weeks ago, because this is a passion topic for me. So if you are into Substack and you like that, you can follow the lightning round on Substack, and I write about this occasionally, so for free. So all right, well, this has been the long-awaited literacy episode of Tell Me About It, and we hope this cleared up a few things for you. If you have comments or questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. We would love to hear from you. We are available on Spotify and YouTube at Tell Me About It, an SLP podcast, and we are also on Instagram at Tell Me About It SLP. We will see you next time.
Bye.